Well, welcome back, everyone. Good morning, good night, good day, good evening, wherever you are on the planet or whatever time you're watching this. This is episode 3737, can you believe it, of the Journey of Integral Recovery. And we're just loving this experience, and we're loving you guys. And I just got back, a couple of days ago from Albany, New York, and I went there at the invitation of Dr. Adam Gorman, who had been as a collaborator with me basically from the very beginning of this integral recovery thing. And he did a dissertation on integral recovery, the work I was started, and he has an appendix in the book, Integral Recovery. Anyway, we're real pals. I met him at 18, gave him his first job. He was highly underqualified. It didn't the rules, but I was a boss and intuitively just said, hire this guy. And he was awesome. So, and he's continued to be a friend and an inspiration. So anyway, we presented at the state of New York State Recovery Conference in Albany, downtown Albany, which is the capital of New York. You know, remember your, grade school stuff. And it's all these massive, impressive government buildings. And we were at a conference in a brand new, very beautiful facility. And we did 3 presentations there. The first one was on integral recovery. And we had a really big room with a really lot of people, and it was so amazing. It was just the switch went on, and I'm kind of deaf, all right, too much rock and roll and hand grenades, not necessarily in that order, and so I have some hearing loss. So when somebody asks a question, I have to run into the audience and sit right next to just go up my podium and into the crowd, mixing it up and everything. And that is just, as you can tell, I have kind of a booming voice. I don't need a mic, and I was just connecting with these people that were so amazing, and then Adam caught on. He was running around with everybody, and it was a beautiful experience. And then we had a book signing after that, and I only brought 20 books, and they were going like 15 minutes, just bam, 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 bam.
Awesome.
And just connecting, was really moving. Then later on, we did our second presentation, which was on intergenerational addiction, or just how addiction attacks families and what to do about it. In our experience and using the integral stuff. Also really cool. It was on fire. Then later on, we went to Adam Gorman's center in Albany, 7:00 in the evening, and a lot of his clients and people were there, and blah, 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 a lot of people. Again, it was a full room. And by that time, I was so exhausted that not a lot of room left for John. So God just came through. It was probably the most amazing talk I think I've ever done. The presence was so amazing. I'm sitting in the front row, and all these young recovering heroin addicts, and there's just so much love and so much compassion there, so much beauty. Very moving, beautiful experience. I just did a Trump thing, something like that. Okay, we can edit that. Kidding, but by the way, Adam Gorman does a wonderful Trump impression. He was laughing the whole time. Adam, stop that, man! I'm trying to get serious with things. So, but the other thing is, both at the conference and at the thing at Adam's center, there are all these people coming up who just love the podcast, and it was so moving. It's like the first time, we get emails and stuff, but just meeting and I had one woman who she had 3 months clean, and it said the podcast had kept her from drinking 2 or 3 times, and I was just like, oh my God,
that's wonderful.
How cool and beautiful is that? Yeah. So it was it was a really amazing thing, and we just need to get out to more conferences and speak about this stuff, because when I'm on, or when it starts coming through me, it's like, we're going to get to your topic in a second, Bob, and this is a good example of it, how the ego just gets out of the way and it just pours through. And it is so inspiring for me, inspiring for all of us. We're right in the middle of the zone that we're supposed to be doing in our lives, and it's really self-evident, and it's not even faith at that point, just the knowledge and understanding of that, and how deeply grateful and beautifully humbly grateful we can be for that experience. And I certainly was.
That's beautiful, John. It's great to hear from you. John, I want to ask you, is there any way that any of your presentations were recorded in any form?
Well, my phone, which I lost this morning,
Okay.
I did record the two at the, but I don't know how good it's going to be. So,
Well, sure would be a resource if it's available. Love to hear. I'm really glad to hear about your final
yeah,
one.
and I'm starting to learn all the stuff, the things that I didn't do that I thought about. So, next time
Yeah.
we'll know better. So,
Yeah. I want to ping off of you, John. And this is what I had planned to talk about, but I talked to you earlier, John, and Doug. We haven't spoken this week. There's a fair bit of momentum that's developing here locally. I gave 6 presentations this week just this week, and John knows this, and it's just extraordinary. I shared with my wife Colleen. I shared with her the momentum that's building is so gratifying. So there's 6 presentations, and every one of them was integrally informed. They were to different audiences. They were to the faculty at my university. They were to client groups. One was to a group of recovery worker clinicians, non-clinical recovery workers, I guess I'd say. One of them was an online...
which means they don't have a degree. They're not.
Yeah. I'm going to speak about it because I want to flesh it out, and we may want to see where this goes for us because I had a chance to talk to debrief with you, John, about this, or you, Doug. And then one of them was an online podcast. It's just called Ask an Addiction Specialist. And in all of them, what I was wanting to do was to translate the quadrants from the AQUIL model, from integral recovery, from Ken Wilber, into something that was experience near, and I did not use any integral language. And so it's the first time I've done this, and it met with different responses. I think it was successful in the main. I find it ironic and interesting that I felt like the clients who are in early recovery, typically from heroin or meth addiction, they seem to get it the most powerfully and most intuitively. That's quite ironic to me, you guys.
Yeah.
But I do want to share something, and I want to run it by you, and I'd like very much to dialogue about it if you guys are interested. I gave one presentation to the group of recovery workers, and they're non-clinical, and what that means is these are people that are in recovery. Many of them have been state certified as recovery workers, chemical dependency counselors, and they work in local rehabs here in Orange County. And I presented to this group, and I'll tell you real quickly what I did. Is that I gave them a sheet of paper, and I said, draw a line like this and like a line like this, one vertically and one horizontally. And I said, in the upper right-hand corner, you guys know where this is going to go. I said, in the upper right-hand corner, I want you to answer this question. How would a medical doctor define addiction? So they did that. And I said, now the upper left-hand corner. How would a therapist define addiction? And so they did that. These, by the way, are not therapists. So they're writing about things that they're not. Lower right-hand corner. How would a courtroom judge define addiction? Bam, they did that. Lower left-hand corner. How would the loved one of an active addict define addiction? Wow. Bam, there. And then I had him flip it over on the blank side, and I said, and I had typed it, how would you define addiction? And so they did this, and it took however long it took. We didn't debrief at all. And then I opened it up to conversation, and we went through each one of those, what we think of as quadrants. And people got it. I mean, these are recovery workers. By the way, clients get this too, because I did the same doggone thing with them.
I was just saying how I would have loved to have been your student when you were teaching. That's awesome, Bob. Go ahead.
You're very sweet. You're very sweet. Thank you, John. I have to tell you guys where this went. Shouldn't have surprised me, but it did. Let me see if I can get back the conversation. Let's see. Because of the nature of this group, on the backside, when they said, how would you define addiction? Everyone who shared said, I would define addiction as a spiritual problem with a spiritual solution. That's not surprising to me. I do think that there were a couple of people there that didn't raise their hands because I think there's enough group pressure that to come up with something that was different than that probably would take amazing resolve. So that was really the unanimous response to that. But here's where the plot thickens, and this is where I really want to draw you, Doug, and you, John, in. Is that one woman to my left said, Dr. Bob, you know, a doctor's approach or a therapist's approach or a judge's approach, those are all very interesting. And they had really nailed it, you guys. By the way, they nailed the quadrants, I mean, just intuitively. But she said to me, and she said it out of complete honesty, she says, but aren't those all just opinions? And I stayed with it because, you know, in the heat of the moment, and you'll realize this, John, just on the heels of your presentation, you're in your integral mode. And so I just wove that into I said, well, and yeah, we just talked about different approaches and whatever like this. I worked with it. In fact, I cited somebody. There had been a client 2 days before I'd presented this to a client group, and a client at the end of the presentation, same exercise, said, "Thank you, Dr. Bob. Can you now give us the true definition of addiction?" And bless his heart, again, just there was no guile in his question at all. And my response, I said, "That's the right question. Thank you." And I said, "They're all the definition. It's all of these." And you know what his response was to me, you guys? This is the client. I'm going to come back to the recovery worker. The client looked at me and he said, "I was thinking you were going to give us a Webster's definition of addiction." This is verbatim what he said. And he paused for a second. He says, "I'm so relieved you didn't." Really powerful to me. First time I'd ever met this client. So flashback to 2 days ago with the recovery workers is that when I brought that same story, because I told them the story I just told you guys about the client who said the Webster's definition, they all looked at me, and you know what? It didn't convince nobody a nothing. It was like, no, we have the definition. And I want to tell you guys this final experience and open it up. It wasn't until I left that day, it was just an hour presentation. I was walking probably 200 yards to my car. No, it's 100 yards. It wasn't very far. And it was only when I walked out that it hit me like a foot in the gut. And so I went, holy moly. Holy moly, they really mean this. And they're working, by the way, with physicians and working with therapists, and they're looking at this as opinion. In the day of fake news, that climate change is a hoax, it fills of that same enormity. And it wasn't until I left the group that it really hit me, the gravity of this. Thank goodness, you guys, I'm coming back next week for a second presentation. So I'll have a chance to work this. And it was interesting. It wasn't until later that I actually went into a judgmental place. It was like, you got to be freaking kidding me. But soon enough that dissolved, because that's where the work needs to be done. It needs to be done right there where there are bridges between these worlds. And I'm perfectly suited because I'm a psychologist who lost his professorship and his license. By the way, I started with that story. I saw the story. It's my life. I did it, and they were so appreciative of that. It was like, I said, "Why are you appreciative?" They said, who is this transparent? So I told my story about that. And so I have this background as a psychologist, and I'm also in recovery. And so it's like, if not me, then whom is kind of the question.
Exactly. It's beautiful.
There's one other piece I want to say. Let's see if I can get it back, you guys. Oh. Another person right before we finished said, "Can I just ask you, Dr. Bob?" And I said, "Yeah." And she says, "Isn't a courtroom judge's," because they had all come up with what a courtroom judge would say about addiction. Basically, a courtroom judge would say 5 years. That's how I define addiction, is 5 years. Variance on that. She said, isn't that just superficial? And I looked at her, and I wasn't in the mode that I am with you guys, because we're close and I love you and I know you. But I said, I went back to my initial story. I said, the loss of my tenured professorship and the loss of my license to practice as a clinical psychologist, I don't know how you define that, but I do not define that as superficial. And it's like, and if I don't get that lower right-hand quadrant in my recovery, I didn't use this word, I'm fucked.
Yeah.
Just with a wish that every one of these quadrants, and even those that we're not imagining right now, and everything on the back side of that sheet, every one of those things is key. But I guess what I want to leave it with you guys is, and you guys, we all know this, but it was like, that is seen as superficial. The other side, the quadrants, they're seen as opinions. And it was really bracing. I have to just confess, it was really bracing for me. So I just want to open it up. Any thoughts from either one of you, and just kind of talk into this, because it's right in the heart of this whole integral sensibility. And I ran right up against it in a way. I don't hang out with these people anymore, for you to know. I work with clinicians. Every in-service I've given over the last 2 years has been to a group of clinicians. When I go to universities, I speak to clinicians. And I'm preaching to the choir, because there are very few of them that don't get an integral perspective at some level.
Yeah.
is that there's much more openness to this, but to be speaking to non-clinical folk who have been in recovery, have found Jesus, so to speak, in a certain modality, to question that raises such anxiety. So the only thing that saved my ass on Thursday is they liked me. I think they liked me because I showed up. It really helped a lot, but I don't think they liked the message at all because I think it made them more anxious than hell. I'm not saying this out of disrespect because John and Doug, that would have been me at any point in my life, especially back in my early Christian days. I would have been so uptight with what this person is talking about. My inclusivity would have been seen as being wishy-washy, and that's how they saw this. It's like, aren't these other guys full of it? Isn't it? Let's condescend to them and we'll hear what a judge has to say or a therapist, but really, that's just a flippant opinion. Science, that's just opinion. That's just opinion. So anyway, I'll leave it with you guys.
So, Bob, I think that the way you approach this, the way you approach the teaching of it is absolutely brilliant because the power of the integral model lies in the synthesis of these different opinions and different approaches, ways of thinking at things. And Ken has taught in the Superhuman Operating System for one, but in some of his other written work too, that one of the fastest ways to accelerate your level development and movement to the next levels of development is through the act of taking other perspectives. And the way you taught quadrants forced people outside of their normal modality of thinking to take these other perspectives and see how different people would define addiction. Through taking these perspectives, we get an intuitive understanding of the quadrants for people who have never been exposed to it before, as well as increased capacity to take perspectives. It becomes very clear when you offer the experience for them to go through and see it in all these different ways, to realize that addiction is a complex problem. And then the leap after that hopefully people will leave with and did leave with is that you can apply that to not only addiction and recovery, but to pretty much any area of your life. So I think there's a lot of wisdom in that. And I would have loved to have been one of your students too. I think that.
Thanks, Doug. Thank you, Doug. I want to check something out with you. Is that at least in the latter story with the recovery workers, as I said, ironically, the clients, I did this exercise with two different client groups. I also shared it with my refuge recovery group, and it was intuitively received, intuitively obvious. But with the clients and with the refuge recovery, but with the recovery workers, the non-clinical treatment staff, they did not leave with that apprehension. They did not leave with that. In fact, they left probably feeling sorry for me, and maybe they're glad I'm coming back next week because if they have another shot at me, maybe they can finally convince me of the failings of my ways. So I just want to check that out, Doug, in regards to what you just said. My intention was that, and I'll be honest with you, Doug, I was naive going in because I'd already had this experience with clients, and I thought, well, gosh, darn it, if I've got clients that are 2 weeks off of heroin, certainly the recovery staff will be able to agree with this. Wrong. Well, didn't happen.
Let me step in here. Certainly a judge is going to look at addiction as a criminal justice issue. Okay? Yeah. Because we commit crimes and do things that we wouldn't do otherwise.
Right.
Often when I was working in the wilderness, I was working with groups of young women, teenage girls, and I'd ask them, okay, who has had a sexual encounter, one or more, that they wouldn't have had if they hadn't been drinking or drugging? And all of them. Damn, how many times have we done that? Yeah. And, we're starting to have, burglary problems here in Wayne County we never had. And it's because there's meth going on here. It's the drug thing. So, drugs makes us normally good people that wouldn't ever do that. But when the cravings for drugs are under the influence of drugs or under the influence of alcohol, do violent, crazy ass, stupid things that you wouldn't do otherwise. So it definitely kicks it into the lower right of criminal justice issue, no doubt. And that's why 80% of everybody in our jails in the United States, we have more percentage of population in prison than any other country are there because of drugs and alcohol related offenses. So
John, let me jump in here real quickly just about this piece, and I want you to continue on. I'll be brief. Is that in the refuge meeting yesterday, one of my best friends in the refuge meeting told me this story, and I'll disguise it to protect his privacy. But the basic idea was that when he went in to a courtroom situation for his third DUI, the judge looked at him and looked at him with respect, actually, and said, if you want to kill yourself, drinking yourself to death, that's your choice. If you want to get behind a car after you've been drinking, that's my job. That really clarified it for me. And by the way, the gentleman who was sharing with me really got this himself as well, is that my own interior world is my interior world. But as soon as I take that out into society, that becomes the province of criminal justice. You're absolutely right. Yeah.
We specialize, and that's okay. That's a fully integral treatment program. You're going to bring in all these different pieces to it, and it is the job of your doctors to look at it from a medical perspective.
Yes.
It is a job of your psychologist to look at it as a psychological perspective, just like you were saying with the judge, and like John was saying too. It becomes a criminal problem, and so you look at it from that perspective. But as people in recovery, it's our responsibility, our necessity to understand that all of these factors play a role, and that looking at any one of them does not solve the whole problem, because there is information and solutions to be gleaned from all of them. And our society encourages this kind of intellectual conceit of the approach you've been trained in is the only way and the right way to deal with something. Which
intellectual conceit, that's beautiful.
You know, and also, I mean, when you say opinions, you could say perspectives, okay? And those are different perspectives we're talking about in integral speak. And guess what, folks? Some perspectives are more informed and more intelligent and should be paid attention to more than other perspectives. Okay.
In fact, John, the comment being made, and you know this, is that when the comment describes it as an opinion, it's actually demoting it. So that perspective is actually being seen as lesser. So it's really not seen as a viable other perspective, like looking at world religions. I may be a Buddhist, I may be a Christian, they're all valid. No. It's really clear that Buddhism has it and Christianity sucks. It's that demotion that went on. And so to talk about a medical perspective based in scientific research, to have that relegated to the slag heap of opinion was shocking to me. I should know it. I do know it intellectually. All I have to do is read the paper today, which I did. That's all I have to do. But to run into it with a group of, as you were saying, Doug, recovery workers who ideally would be able to embrace the fact that there are physicians consulting, there are therapists meeting every day. These people all have legal criminal justice issues going on, and to have that seen as somehow opinion or less than or not the real issue was really bracing, as I said.
Yeah, and I just want to say, I'm a pretty smart guy, and I've read about cancer. I've read about cancer, and I've had family members that have cancer. I've known people who have died from it. However, I have my best friend when I was growing up, and during a period, I mean, I had several best friends because I was always moving. But right before I left home, Buzzy Denham, and he became an oncologist. Okay, so when it comes down to it, if you want an opinion about cancer, I mean, mine has some validity because of the experience of it, and I've read a little bit. But I would really talk to Buzzy. Dr. Buzzy Denham. And I'm outing him here because there's really nothing, you have to be anonymous for being an oncologist. I mean, that's a pretty cool thing. I mean, he was really smart. We'd be in a chemistry class together. My eyes would be crossed with he just get it all. So anyway, I would say he not that my perspective isn't valuable. And certainly if you wanted a fuller view of things, you could take my perspectives as somebody who's lost loved ones from cancer and seen it from that perspective and everything. But when you get down to it and you want a lot of information quickly, I talk to Buzzy any day of the week, and twice on Sundays when it comes to cancer.
Me too. So, I'm all for Buzzy.
Yeah. And, that was his nickname, and he kept it, all these years. Go Buzzy, God bless him. So anyway, I love the guy. So that's kind of what I wanted to say, but that's, it's interesting.
Yeah, I want to ask you guys both a question if I can, and Doug, we'll come right back to you if this doesn't fit with where you might be going. I'm really interested to talk with both of you, both personally, but also for the sake of our podcast listeners, about suggestions you might have for helping to evolve a group in conversation. I'm very committed to this group of recovery staff. I have my reactions, my personal reactions, but I'm no longer very satisfied for very long with just writing them off. It feels like it's just kind of perpetuating a kind of polarization. That's not really what I'm wanting to do here. But I'm very interested in terms of just kind of cash value. What might I bring to them next week? And more generally, what might we all bring as we feel more and more imbued with integral sensibility in terms of all quadrants, all levels, et cetera? What might we do to help further the conversation in the spirit of what you were saying, Doug, which is to evolve consciousness, evolve awareness, and John, with you, by means of embracing multiple perspectives, ever more perspectives. It becomes a very practical question for me. And exactly a week from this past Thursday, I'll be sitting there with them for my second session. That one was to be dedicated to doing the same thing with the developmental lines as I did with the quadrants. Is a kind of I introduced it as a scratch and sniff approach to Wilbur.
Yeah, well, I think that's what set off the thing. Instead of kind of just telling them something here, you made them come up with their opinions, and then, but the integral moment, the beautiful integral moment, is when you said it's all of these to that individual, and that's the truth. It is a criminal justice problem. It is a relational, violence toward others and yourself problem in the lower left quadrant. It is an interior depression, despair, interior problem. It's obviously a physical body, brain, chemical, organs, muscles, tissues, all that stuff problem too. It is all of those, and, they say there's no shame in being an addict. No, there's not, but we do shameful things when we're, under the throes of addiction. We do things that we'd never do,
I have a thought, John, as I'm listening to you, is that what I didn't mention to you guys was in this room full of recovery workers, there was one client who had to stay back that day. He was ill, ironically, with the same thing I've had, which is this lingering cough and bronchitis and stuff. And so he stayed back. In fact, the organizer of the event asked me, would it be okay if clients attended? And I went, basically, hell yes, I would love for clients to be here. And so we had one client, and all the rest were his recovery people, workers. And again, ironically, maybe in hindsight, I shouldn't be surprised. I'd never met him before. He sat over to my far left. He got this stuff, what you just said, John, as you were saying it, about the multiple perspectives. He got it intuitively. And my thought about it, just as I was listening to you, is he's living it. Doug, you and I, in our addiction and in our recovery, this isn't oblique, because every one of these things touches part of my experience. What you wrote just this last week, Doug, about, it was from a previous podcast, but somebody was responding online about issues of meaning and value and purpose. There's no addict in recovery, and I would even say there's no addict in active addiction that doesn't get the validity of that perspective. No matter how fucked up you are, you still get that. That's something I've been talking about. So having said that, this client got this, and my thought about it, John, as I was listening to you, is that I'm sitting in a room of people. I asked them how many are in recovery, if they're willing to share. Everyone raised their hand. So that includes me, includes the client, but includes all of us. The difference it might be is that those that raise their hands that are recovery workers, they've all found it. They've all found it, and it's an it. And anything that deviates from that, unless they're particularly kind of moving forward, let's say, in terms of embracing multiplicity, it is singular. And I'm suggesting, by my suggesting it's all of these, that's the wrong answer if it is the only way to go. So anyway, and the client, interestingly, hasn't found it yet. He's very early in recovery. Maybe he'll find it, and then he'll be disillusioned by me too. But it was very curious to me that he was more open to multiplicity than with the staff I was speaking to.
So, Bob, we all have a vested interest in our paradigm being the right one, especially when we've invested so much time, years of schooling, oftentimes in training, in whatever discipline it is, whatever we're approaching recovery. We have a vested interest in protecting that. This applies not only just to recovery, but to all our opinions, our political opinions, our religious beliefs. We have a desire, a strong, burning desire to make our opinions right, or to protect them, because they have served us for so long. We have so much invested in them, and opening people's minds to a different possibility or bringing complexity into that isn't as simple as saying, here's a different way to think about it, because it doesn't resonate with what you already know. And the key to that is, and this is a very integral way of communicating too, as you speak to people at different levels. Here we're talking about different lines, but it applies to levels or whatever the case may be, is that you meet people where they are. I was having a conversation with my wife a couple of weeks ago where we were talking about someone she knows who has some very judgmental opinions about people who are different than he is, and you don't change their belief by jumping 2 levels ahead. It's like trying to teach calculus to a second grader. You need to learn the multiplication tables first. So I would suggest, with wherever somebody is in this group, whatever their discipline, whatever their opinion, what's the smallest incremental move you can get to open their mind and move them along that path. And it's going to be different for everyone that we speak to, but I think that 1% change that lets a little crack of light shine in the window is enough.
Thank you, Doug. That's really thoughtful. I really appreciate that. That resonates. That feels like that's accurate. And in fact, as you were talking, I was thinking about, how's this, you guys, is that I was just taking, these guys have found it, and their it is singular. But I have to be careful because I found it, and my it is plural.
Yeah, well,
and I can impose my it on their it without the increments that you're talking about, Doug, and do great damage, or certainly not bridge anything. So I get attached. My reactivity as I was walking those 100 yards to my car is that I've got fucking it, and it is multiple.
but at a certain stage in your career, right, it was it, and it's just all developmental. In other words, it's really hard dealing with somebody in the first stages of addiction to get them off it, because that it right now is working for them so well on so many levels. It's the honeymoon phase. They're happy. They have new friends. Blah blah blah. The movie Train Spotting. I don't know.
I love that. Yeah, I love that. I just saw it recently again.
Oh my God! You start out, and these are the hippest, most beautiful London. They're doing heroin. It's all good, and then it just goes on. The baby dies in the crib. The rip off, the lies, the horror.
It's
and that's
horrible.
But if you watch the first 15 minutes, you go, "Damn, I want some," that sort of thing. And so it's hard. You have to do a lot of exterior manipulations, consequential stuff that's not coming from the inside to work with something. It can be done, but it's a challenge. And the same thing developmentally, when somebody's bodies are born again, 12-stepper, and it's saving their lives, they don't want to hear all this stuff because it's working for them. And that has to be accepted. Most of the integral recovery was written, it was, outside of the circle, or maybe transcended the circle of AA, and people who have done multiple AA treatments and have, get to the point where I got it. Thank you very much. But I got to move on. There's something beyond this, or people, they just can't get their heads into it. Those are the people generally that contact me, have contacted us over,
John, I'll tell you my rub with it, and I love both of your guys' input on this. It's not new to our conversations. I really get what you're saying. In my heart of hearts, I don't have any need for somebody who's got it to lose it. I mean, that's fine with me. It's fine with me. I think it becomes a little bit of a leverage issue for me, though, is that when you have recovery workers working with the same clients I'm working with, and I'm sitting with these clients, and they're experiencing this being sliced and diced into the right answer is this, and having been an addict, actively moving into committed recovery and feeling like I was starving for somebody to get the fact that this is biological, that this is spiritual, and everything in between, is that my empathy is for the clients that I see. And honestly, some of those clients come to my groups and they've got it, and I'm right on with it. I just had somebody last week, I can picture him clear as a bell. He was struggling with what I was presenting because it wasn't a single it. And I came back the next week and I said to him, I'm sorry because I didn't get that you got it, and I support it for you. I really meant that. But that's not my primary impetus. My impetus is for the rest of the room, many of whom these aren't sharp integrative philosopher types at all. I'm not talking about that. They're like truck drivers and so on, but they get that what's going on in addiction is multiform. And when they're given just a unitary answer, it leaves them sadly missing something. It's not, that's where the issue is for me, is that it feels like to me integral applies to the streets at a very primal level. It doesn't have to be some high-minded, sophisticated philosophy. It's just the reality of being an addict or an addict in recovery is to realize if I don't have meaning in my life, I'm fucked. If I don't address my brain imbalance, I'm fucked. If I don't get some practice going on, if I don't deal with my trauma, all of that stuff, and that's you can see my passion right now with it. That's where my passion is. But the trick is, back to what Doug said, is that how can I be patient and kind of hold my passion in check and not get all reactive and shit? How can I begin to broker an expanded understanding from the people? The people I met with on Thursday spend much more time with these clients than do any clinical staff. You come in for an hour or two or a group or three a week, but day in, day out, they're living with recovery staff who believe it's a single answer. And I see those clients coming in and feeling liberated by integral conversation. It goes unnamed, but it's integral conversation in every group. They feel liberated by that, but they don't spend their weeks with me. They spend their weeks in a group that is slicing and dicing.
Bob, I think that I agree with you completely that if you found something that is working for you, then by all means, congratulations and stick with it. Please do what's working for you. But when you hear that there is one particular answer, it's medical, it's psychological, it's societal, whatever the case, and that doesn't resonate with you and your experience and your typology, because we all respond differently to different things. And when that one answer doesn't work for you, it's not what you need in that moment. We have such complex histories and relationships and psychological patterns and traumas and different bodies. Our brains are wired differently. Our neurons are connected differently. We need different things. And when the answer that we hear is the one right way isn't what we need at that time, then we lose people along the way. And so you have to, if you find that right way, that gateway in that's going to help you get better, then continue it. But we need to have these options available too. And I wish that was something more treatment providers understood, is that if you're not connecting with somebody, continuing to bang the same drum is not necessarily going to break through, when a different approach and viewing it through a different lens might resonate more effectively.
Well said, Doug. Thank you, Doug. Well said. Well said.
And also, it's weird. All the talks I've given, in this country and abroad, I was really worried if I was going to get attacked by 12-steppers, and as you guys know, I have great love for AA, and I sincerely speak from that place. I've never been attacked, either afterwards or during the process at all. In fact, a lot of the old guys have been around for 30 or 40 years. And they just sit there, and I think they love the emphasis on spirituality, because most of the people that have made it through AA over the years, they say, it's a spiritual thing. It was, that's what brought me through. So I would just quote the book and talk about your meetings and stuff like that, and just let them know. It's like Ken's talking about in the future of religions. It's like we're not trying to do away with anything. We're just trying to add to it. The traditions. Obviously, you want to get away with pedophilia and all the horrible stuff, but the good, solid things of the tradition. We're not trying to change that. We're just trying to add an integral perspective. So people will do an integral practice. Basically, that's integral spirituality. The only time I really got attacked is one time I suggested that marijuana was also an addictive substance, or certainly could be. Man, this woman jumped all over my case. And, wow. Truth is, I've seen lots of pot addicts in my career.
Hello.
I write about it in my book. My girlfriend in college, I loved dearly, was addicted to pot. She'd run out of pot, she'd go crazy. So, and, I was suggesting maybe next week, a good thing to start with was, okay, let's look at step 11. Because I know you're a prayer meister and a meditator, and that's probably one of the most underdeveloped steps in the 12 steps, because we've never had any, spiritual teachers or meditators that could teach us how to do prayer in a contemplative, inner, ongoing, transformative sense. And, it's nice to have petitionary prayer and gratitude prayer. Thank you for keeping me sober today, God, and please help me stay sober this morning. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, but it's not the deep transformational stuff that I think Bill was talking about. Yeah,
you just brought something to mind, John, and I thank you for this. I do find it ironic, and I didn't see it till you just said this, is that in the groups I led this week, probably 4 of the 6 groups, I didn't do this with the faculty, is that I start with a mindfulness practice. I start with about 7 minutes of a meditation, just body-oriented mindfulness. And I didn't do that with this recovery staff. And if you think about state-specific consciousness, is that if I move in there and already I'm coming in, they don't know me, I come in dressed a little bit up. I'm a psychologist, defrocked or not, etc. And all of that, is that is that why wouldn't they be poised to kind of operate out of that level of consciousness that they operate in waking day, just kind of rational, self-centered awareness, which we all do. And why not? And I will do this, John, and I thank you for this. I'll start next week by doing what I did with the clients, which I find ironic that that's where I did it. And I'll start with a meditation, just so that maybe all of us, maybe most of all moi, may drop into a more compassionate awareness, and certainly a more kind of a present-centered type of thing. Thank you for that.
When you do it with the group, I did all 3 of my presentations because you're always talking about doing it. So,
physician, heal thyself.
Yeah, really, right. Dr. Bob, do it. Dr. Bob says. Yeah, and it was beautiful, and also we were all writing on just the great tragedy in Las Vegas, right? So we had that in mind, and we're just sending out, just love and compassion for all of us, because that, these events, and of course we hear about all that stuff in the Middle East, but when it comes home, it's so much closer. And
you just opened up something else too, John, is that this would be the aim of meditation for sure, but that if I had begun by making note of the tragedy in Las Vegas, it's hard not to move into a heart-centered space with that. And so even though I did something with the quadrants, helping people to imagine perspectives, a doctor's perspective, etc., that's not really a heart-filled response. It's more of an intellectual thing, and it's helpful, but it's limited. And I wonder what would happen if I were to have added, and if I am to add, more of a heart-centered meditation included, whatever that would be, so that we move into the thought that I had with that is that just as the tragedy in Las Vegas is so unbelievably beyond imagination, so are the deaths every day of friends of these people that are in recovery. They've just lost people this week that died of overdoses, and to hold the space for them, just as we hold the space for those that were murdered in Las Vegas, and start with that. So that when we move into conversation, we're moving out of a place of humility and deep sorrow and deep compassion, ideally. Yeah.
And one of the criticisms of integral, and rightly so, is that sometimes it just becomes a big head trip. So I mean, obviously the heart's accounted for there, but the heart and all that's it's not a mental concept. It is a mental concept, but it has to be a reality.
Thank you.
And if we just open our hearts, then we can open our big brains too. And that's the oil that helps all this stuff go in, without too much. It gets down to love, and our beautiful map has to be an expression of love. Okay, so everyone, thank you so much. And we're running out of time for this week. And Dr. Bob, I want to thank you so much for really bringing, not only were you bringing your experience, but you're bringing something that was really hurting you and causing you, pain.
Thanks, John.
And
thank you.
It just shifted in fellowship, shifted in our holding and our discussing and putting it out there. And that's why we need each other. So anyway, love you guys. And
love you too.
We'll see you next time.
Thank
and I can't wait for it. God bless. All of you out there, we love you. Thank you.